Uh, so good evening, everyone. My name is Terry Fletcher. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection. I want to welcome everyone to the DEP's public meeting for the Division of Air Quality permit application for Optima Belle LLC, permit R13-2093I. With me tonight is staff from the Division of Air Quality, including Director Laura Crowder, New Source Review Program Manager Bev McCoon, Permit Engineer John Carney, Environmental Resource Specialist Nicole Ernest, as well as staff from the division's Compliance and Enforcement section. The purpose for this public meeting is to provide information, answer questions, and primarily give you the opportunity to share your comments or information about this permit application with the DEP. The meeting is being recorded so that the comments you share can be taken into consideration and entered into the public record for this permit application. Please note that a decision will not be made this evening. All comments received by the agency prior to the close of the comment period, including those provided here tonight, will be reviewed and considered by the staff, and you will receive notification once a decision is made. The comment period for this permit application opened on June 10th, 2023, and will close at 5 p.m. on Friday, August 11th, 2023. Comments can be submitted via email to John Carney at jonathan.w.carney@wv.gov or by regular mail to John Carney at the Division of Air Quality, 601 57th Street Southeast, Charleston, West Virginia, 25304. And we'll have that information up on the slide so you can write that down if you need the information. It should also be included on your handout at the door. To ensure that we have an accurate record of everyone attending this evening, for the official record, we ask that you please provide your name and contact information on the sign-in sheet by the door. As far as the agenda for tonight, we will begin the meeting with a brief presentation by Mr. Carney, which will touch on the DAQ's permitting process and requirements, as well as some technical details of Optima Belle's permit application. We will then move on to a question and answer session. Any questions that we cannot answer this evening will be answered in our response to comments document. After all those questions have been asked, we will take official comments. Please note that once we move into the official comment portion, we will no longer be able to answer questions. Any questions that you ask as part of your official comments will be addressed in the response to comments document. Each commenter will be given 5 minutes to speak, and I will call on those who indicated they wish to speak on the sign-in sheet in the order they appear. If there's time at the end, we can circle back to allow for additional comments. As you can see, we have a podium and a microphone set up so that we can record the questions and the comments for the record. So we ask that if you have your question or your comments that you'd like to provide, please step up to the podium and ask and provide your comments from there. To ensure that we successfully achieve the purpose of this meeting, we ask that everyone be respectful and considerate of each other by refraining from using foul language and name calling and from interrupting others while they are speaking. We also ask that you keep your comments on the topic of this permit application so that our time together is used efficiently. So I want to thank everyone for bearing with me through those opening remarks and instructions. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to DAQ Permit Engineer John Carney, who will give a brief presentation. John? Thank you. Oh, yeah, sorry. Good point, Ben. So if anyone needs to use the restroom, they are through this door here. Down the hall, there's a sign to the right that says to the restroom. It'll take you to another hallway. You make a left, and on down that hallway, you'll run right into them. So if anyone needs to use the restroom, feel free. Won't interrupt anybody at all. Thank you. John?
Thank you, Terry, for that introduction. And I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening. The topic of this evening's presentation is the Optima Belle modification to the permit. I'll be discussing the permit under the permitting process under the Clean Air Act permitting process and what is being permitted. And I will also discuss the permitting requirements, limits, monitoring, testing, and I will follow that up with a summary. Permitting under the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act was a mandate to the U.S. EPA to protect public health and welfare. And in order to meet this mandate, EPA developed national ambient air quality standards and regulations for emissions of hazardous air pollutants, which are designed to protect human health and the environment. State rules and regulations were established to ensure these standards are met and kept through permitting and enforcement.
Could you speak up, please, or use the microphone?
Okay. What the permitting process does is it's used to determine and enforce compliance with state and federal air quality rules and regulations. And it's used to determine and enforce compliance with facilities, air emissions, and provide a framework for public notice and participation. What it cannot do is take into consideration non-air quality issues such as zoning, traffic zoning, national energy issues, et cetera, or location of the facility or non-air quality environmental impacts. Now on to the permitting process. To start the permitting process, the company submits an application. And along with the application, they publish a legal ad that starts a 30-day public comment period. During this 30 days, the application is reviewed for technical or for completeness, and the company would be notified of any deficiencies at that time. Once the application is determined to be complete, a technical review begins in which we determine whether or not air quality rules apply, what air quality rules apply, and if the proposal meets those rules. If the proposal meets the air quality rules, the DAQ publishes a public notice. That begins a 30-day public comment period. And a copy of the evaluation draft permit are then published and made available to the public for review and comment. After the close of this comment period, all comments received are reviewed and addressed by the DAQ, and a final decision is made. The evaluation draft permit are typically posted at the popular searches at the website shown there. What is being permitted? Optima is removing the equipment listed here, including the double cone dryers, which were involved in the 2020 incident. This equipment has been damaged and will not be returned to service. This is a list of the new equipment to be installed. It'll be used to process materials already permitted. This new equipment that is replacing some of the removed equipment is to be utilized in the same flexible fashion. And it will be controlled by existing control units, emission control units, which include the main scrubber, incinerator scrubber, and dust collectors. The new equipment will also enable the facility to begin producing a new material known as HMAPs, and this HMAPs is a lightweight polystyrene that's used in fire retardant. The proposed emission increases are 820 pounds per year of VOCs, 0.04 pounds per year of styrene, 1.92 pounds per year of ethyl benzene, and the total HAPs listed there are the total of the styrene and ethyl benzene. Limits in the permit. The primary limit is that all the new equipment will be subject to the existing permit requirements, in that the permit defines the small lots manufacturing unit as the totality of the process equipment listed in section 1.0 of the draft permit. Production in this small lots manufacturing unit is limited to the products that meet the emission limits in the permit. The emission control units, the main scrubber, incinerator, and incinerator scrubber are required to operate within specific operating parameters. These include scrubber solution pH and flow rates, and scrubber and temperature range and airflow. Temperature range and airflow for the incinerator. I apologize. The facility is also subject to visible emission limits and leak detection requirements. They are also required to maintain and operate their air pollution control equipment according to manufacturer specifications. The permit requires the facility to monitor production rates of each product, do visible emission checks. They're required to continuously monitor the temperature and airflow of the incinerator and the pH and flow rate of the scrubber solutions. And record keeping of monitoring information is all required. In summary, the emission units that have been removed from the facility have been removed from the draft permit. New equipment to be installed will be used to produce the same batch sizes and yearly quantities in the existing permits, so the emission estimates for existing production are unchanged. The new material, HMAPs, will increase the VOCs and introduce new HAPs, which include ethylene, ethylbenzene, and styrene. The draft permit allows the facility to be operated with the potential to emit with controls below the major source thresholds, and the facility will remain an area source of hazardous air pollutants. This rule requires, is a state rule 45 CSR 13-5.7, requires the secretary shall issue such a permit or registration unless he or she determines that the proposed construction, modification, or relocation will violate applicable emission standards. Here's some information that if you'd like additional notices of DEP, public notices, you can submit your information to the DEP mailing list or write to the public notice list, public information office. And again, I'd like to repeat what Terry said, that the public notice will be extended to Friday, August 11th until 5 p.m. And you can submit your comments via email to me at my email address shown here, or you can submit a written comment. If you do submit an email, please include in the subject line Optima Belle LLC comments in the subject line. Thank you. And I'll now turn over the presentation to Terry for question and answer.
All right. So thank you, John. Appreciate that. Now we're going to turn it over for question and answer. So if anyone has a question, that's that you raise your hand. We call on you to come up to the podium. If you're unable to, that's fine. You can, feel free to just ask your question from your seat, and we'll probably repeat it just so that we can make sure that the recording picks up on it. We have an accurate record of the question asked. So if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand. Call on you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
How often are they inspected?
Okay, so the question was, how often are they inspected? For that, we have some of our enforcement staff here, compliance and enforcement staff, who might be able to answer that question as far as their regularity of inspections.
Hi, my name is Angela Chestnut. I'm an engineer with the Compliance and Enforcement Group in the Division of Air Quality. Optima Belle is typically inspected on a 2-year frequency. So that's the typical frequency that it's inspected.
So it's at least every 2 years, right?
Yeah,
But if
typically
there's,
within the 2 calendar years. Sometimes it's not exactly 24 months, it's within the 2 calendar years.
and also and they may be able to correct me, but if there's a complaint or an issue, DEP staff will obviously respond and go check out what's going on, and that would, count as, having eyes on the facility as well. So if anyone, sees something or experiences something, feel free to give us a call. We'll send someone out to check out what's going on with the facility.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Or just, so if there are pollutants or more when they test it, what happens then?
So if they're, I guess, are you asking if
If they're out of compliance?
if they go, yeah, so there is an enforcement protocol. It's typically start with a notice of violation. So they have to correct the issues that are going wrong. And guys, feel free to jump in and correct me. But if they continue to be out of compliance, they don't correct the issues and still remain out of compliance, then we can take escalating enforcement actions to get them back into compliance.
Is that like a public record or anything that we can look at? Or
Yeah, so all the enforcement action stuff are publicly available, and we have a database with all of our public records. I'd be happy to get with you afterwards and show you how to
do
use
they
it.
know that you're coming? Like the inspection's coming? It's just like random surprise.
All official inspections are unannounced.
Okay,
Um,
I just,
You know, I mean, there are times when they do call ahead because maybe there's something specific we're coming to visit to see a test being done or something of that nature. On the permitting side, forgive me, I'm Beth McEwen, I'm with the permitting program. When we're doing a permit, we will likely call them up and arrange a visit because we want to see what's going on, where they plan to do the location, you know, that kind of thing, where there might not be, the equipment won't be there. So we want somebody to tell us where it's going to be, you know, that kind of stuff. But an actual enforcement inspection where you're coming to determine compliance and get records, et cetera, is routinely unannounced.
okay, thanks.
I saw his hand first, but I'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
Are there any other facilities in the state or other states that contain these chemicals? And do we know, first to answer that question, are these chemicals contained anywhere else in the state? Like any communities like this?
I'm
not sure I'm sure there are other sources who have styrene, you have ethyl benzene, and many sources who emit VOCs, but I couldn't off the
yeah.
top of my head tell you who and how much.
If I'm not mistaken, I mean, these are fairly common in chemical processing type facilities and in industry. So
yes.
So
These are not
we don't
unique.
know any other facilities that would have this, like what communities?
That's what I'm saying. I mean, it's chemical manufacturing, production. Like I said, I can't give you a list off the top of my head, but these are not unique chemicals. These are common. It's the fact that they're on the 187 source category list that defined by EPA as hazardous air pollutants tells you that they're very common. They're out there and
they're regulated.
they're regulated.
So where could we find the answer to the facilities that might have these chemicals?
I mean, we would have to, I mean, we have, we permit a lot of facilities in West Virginia for various reasons. We would have to go back and look through all the permits that we have and review them all and see.
We can pull it from the emissions inventory. There's a database of the emissions that are reported. And then we could go in and look and tell you which facilities emit those.
Yeah, I mean, just so we can know what communities around these areas and what
When you're,
repercussions or any problems there's been in these communities from this.
when you're looking at ethyl benzene and styrene, it would be a shorter list than if you just say VOCs.
Which
But
means-
there's
VOC is a very
V is a-
broad, I mean, it's in,
VOCs it includes a lot of different chemicals.
Because you can get a list.
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
I believe you had a question, sir.
You said that all this is monitored. Is it monitored by humans or by computers or what?
John,
Your system.
The continuous monitors would be by the systems, and those would have to be maintained by humans, of course. But the visible emission checks, those are just, what you observe.
So
With your
something when it
eyes.
Go off, is there a siren that goes off or whistles or alert anybody?
I'm sure
I
the
don't
facility
know.
is likely required to have some kind of emergency response or alert system within their plant or facility. We don't have jurisdiction over those emergency type systems. So I think EPA does, correct? So that would be something that EPA would be able to answer. They would have the records for that, but we can help you find those and find that information and provide that to you. Yes, ma'am. Margaret?
Are the PM 2.5s mentioned in the Gazette article included in this table? Like the small particles?
No,
No, there's no increase in emissions in particulate for this program, for this
that's
permitting
not-
action.
I don't think that's in this, so. But, have you all considered any, like, catalytic combustion or thermal reduction units to eliminate some of this before it's released into the air?
And again, this permitting action doesn't cover those pollutants, so it's not part of this.
But that's a
Review.
byproduct of it, right? Like.
No, what we're talking about here tonight is the removal of equipment and the addition of equipment. And what the increase in emissions is what we are reviewing under this permitting action. And that's not, there's no increase in particulate matter emissions. There's no increase in NOx. The only pollutants that are changing as a result of this permitting action are the VOCs and the addition of the ethylbenzene and the styrene.
Maybe the PM 2.5 is what she's speaking of because it has fine particles that can migrate deep into the lungs and blood.
Yes,
Part of the emissions of
the
that.
permitted source already is permitted for those emissions, is
But
what I'm
they want
saying.
to increase that, correct?
No.
No,
no.
But these are increasing because of this permit, right?
no,
The VOCs, ethylbenzene and styrene are increasing because of this permit.
Yes.
The other pollutants like PM 2.5 are not.
there's no change in those.
I understand that that's not
That's
the permit, but
alarming.
because of the, styrene and ethylbenzene are any of these correlated? Because why would they say that?
No, styrene and ethylbenzene are actually a subset of VOCs.
Yes.
Of volatile organic compounds. So they're not regulated as a particulate, they're regulated as a VOC.
I think maybe if I'm understanding your question or what you're asking is, she's asking is the addition of VOCs or the increase in VOCs, is that going to increase?
Contributing to.
Yeah, are VOCs going to lead to particulate matter being in the air, right?
No, not in this case. It's VOCs are volatile organic compounds. They're regulated because of ozone issues. Particulate matter is regulated separately. And again, ethylbenzene and styrene are actually a VOC, meaning they're a gas. They're not a particulate. So they're not, so they're not regulated as a subset of particulate matter as a, maybe a control. They're regulated as the VOCs.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm referencing the article that was in the paper about it. And it said that there had not been an inspection since December 2020, which was 3 days after the incident that shook our town. And then it also said that, so my question on that is, have there not been any air quality tests done in that area since December 2020 or even before that? Physical air quality tests? We have several chemical plants around there that have emissions. So I guess simply, have there been any air quality tests at the DuPont or the new plant or what they're trying to do, Optima, since December 2020 or before?
Okay, this particular permit, the equipment was damaged and it has not operated because obviously it was damaged at the time. So there's not been an inspection of this because it hasn't been rebuilt yet. So not for that. There are other facilities at the site that have been inspected.
Well, my concern also is that in the paper, it said that there had been no site inspection or tests to determine whether this permit should be given or not. So my concern is the air, whether it's just Optima or DuPont or what it is, the air is everywhere. So my concern is there has been no air quality tests in the area with reference to the consideration of this increase in chemicals. Is that true?
No,
Okay. So there has been physical
There have
air
been-
quality tests.
there have been inspections, and I'd have to defer to the enforcement people as to whether or not there's been an actual stack test or any kind of physical testing of a stack test or anything at the site since then. And I do not know the exact, we have air monitoring we have air monitoring for we have to monitor for the NACs, we have air monitors throughout the state. We have air monitoring stations that meet the requirements of EPA's requirements for what we have to do to demonstrate attainment with the NACs. So there's monitors in the valley. There's not one specifically in the DuPont area. Now, as far as the last inspections, I'll have to refer that to the enforcement staff.
Well, just a general comment, and you have a very good question, ma'am. The idea of testing the air, I think Laura has addressed the idea of monitoring in the valley. I think that's closer to what you're asking about. And actually, in our air permits, which have 5 main sections, we do have a testing section. And as Laura had mentioned, a facility like Chemours for different units may have had testing requirements for engines, for particular equipment under a rule. But I think your question was more on the monitoring side.
Well, one concern is on those monitoring tools or whatever you have, are those based on what's reported from the company, or is there actually physical air quality tests in our area? That would be relevant to deciding whether they could to put out more chemicals if we're not passing that range already. If there's been no physical air quality test, how do we know they are in compliance?
There are different ways to show compliance with the permit. The permit sets forth the records they have to keep, the monitoring they have to do, and testing that they have to do. And as John kind of went through with the presentation, it might be that that we know if you are keeping your incinerator within a proper temperature and a proper flow rate, that means that incinerator is operating properly and should be emitting what we permitted and not exceeding those limits. You have to keep those records. It might be, depending on what it is, it might be that maybe they do a physical test of an emission point, not necessarily for this source, but they might have to do a test every 3 years. That might be part of a state or a federal rule that then gets put into a permit, so they have to do that. I think what you're kind of getting at is that many people think there's like a standard out there that, okay, if you put out, if they add 1 more pound of ethyl benzene, does that mean we have exceeded the ethyl benzene public health standard kind of thing? And that's not really how the monitoring works. We have national ambient air quality standards, and we have monitors out there that monitor the ambient air. So we'll know if these different sources, once they come together, if we show exceedances there of the national ambient air quality standard, we know we need to do some work and look at these sources to reduce emissions. But it's not like I can look at this source, Optima Belle, and know that that's what's going to happen. If they are operating within the parameters that they have told us they will, then we know these are the emissions they'll be putting out, and our monitoring network will help us to know if we are maintaining air quality for the public health.
So based on the reporting from the facility, Angela had mentioned earlier that you visit every 2 years. So has there been a physical air quality test in Belle since December 2020? This is 2023 from that facility, whether it came from Optima, wherever. Has there been a physical air quality test?
I would say that would be something that we can go back and look at the records for and give you the correct answer, because off the top of my head, there are obviously 4 or 5 different permitted entities there now, right? It's not just one company, it's several companies. So we could go back through our records and see if in fact there have been, and the testing that we would be looking for would be something like a stack test where we've actually had a third party, or the company has had a third party come in and measure the actual emissions coming out of, say, the top of a boiler to see what's coming out and see if that matches the company's record. So those types of tests do happen. We would have to go back and look at the records to see if Chemours or Belle Chemical or, if any of those have done that in the last 3 years, we'd have to go back. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Well, my concern is, so you're saying that falls on the responsibility of the company to do the air quality test with the third party? That is not something that's controlled by DEP?
It's if they are required to do it, it's a requirement in the permit. And so it would be the Division of Air Quality, the permit folks that put those requirements in the permit, and then the facility is required to perform those tests and hire the companies. And most of the time, if it's one of our facilities, if we're able to, we go out and also witness the tests so that we're actually seeing the tests being done and reviewing the data. We have a group that reviews the data for those tests to make sure that the calculations are correct, the proper procedures were followed and all those sorts of things. So it's the company's job to hire the third party to do the tests, but all of that information also gets reviewed by our office.
Well, you had stated earlier every 2 years,
So that's
within
a
the calendar
difference.
year or the actually 2 physical years regardless. So
What I was stating was for our compliance and enforcement group, our inspectors go out and complete a full compliance evaluation that includes typically an on-site evaluation of the, if you will, like a snapshot of what's happening the day that we're there. So for instance, if the permit says, in order for the incinerator to work properly, it has to be above 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, we can go look at their control screens for their continuous monitoring systems that we mentioned. And we can literally say, what is the temperature currently while the process is running of that incinerator, and see if it is in fact above 1400 degrees the day that we're there. But then we also review those records. We request records that are required for them to do the visual emissions checks that they typically do monthly to see if anything visually is coming out that they're not supposed to. But that's an inspection. So that's typically every 2 years for Optima, is that we physically go out and inspect. But the testing that we were talking about, where a third party comes in to check to see what's coming out of their stacks, those are on the schedule that's dictated in the permit. So those could be every 3 years, it could be every, that could be in a different schedule. So those are two separate things, the testing and the inspections. Does that make sense?
not really, because what I don't understand too is that you said, is there not a timeline of where they're required to have these tests that you all review them? And as you said, we have 3 or 4 companies right there that's emitting different things. And I'm fortunate that, to live on the eastern part of the plant. So I don't get as much as the western part did. I had someone contact me today and said every Sunday morning they smell emissions coming from that plant. And why is that? So my concern is relying on the reports from the company rather than going as a regulating entity and physically making sure that us in that area aren't smelling, or we have high cancer rates in our area. There has to be some similarities to that. And I wasn't raised in Belle. I moved there many, many years ago. I love it. It's a wide spot in the road, but it's our wide spot in the road, and it's our responsibility to keep it safe for our children. There's a grade school half a mile from that plant. So I guess I don't know that my question was really answered, but I would like to know whether it's a follow-up, where I can access that information as to when they've been taking place, what the emissions were, and that type of thing. I just respect you. I just have questions.
Well, and that's what, I think we would have to go back through the records to look at the specific tests that have taken place over the last couple of years. And, to actually answer that question.
And you understand my concern with our area, because I've lost relatives to cancer that's lived there their whole life. I haven't, but I love the area and we need to regulate that. It's not just with the multiple plants that we have there. That's even more important.
But just to be clear, all of our records are public, and any testing records, any enforcement inspections, like when Angela goes and does an enforcement inspection, she documents it and writes it up, and it's in the file. So everything is on our public database, and Terry's talking about that. It's called AX. Anybody can log in on our webpage. It's DEP, and as long as you know the company name, you can search, and all of our files are there. Everything since 2015, and we're in a process of Anything previous to that is hard copy, and if somebody files a FOIA, says we can't find it, then we'll go and pull those, and that will get scanned in and put on a public database as well.
And where do we find that public database on the web?
It's on our webpage. It's
on the
called,
homepage?
it's on the DEP webpage. I think if you do the public part at the top of the webpage, you're looking for what's called the AX database.
AX database.
Yeah, and all, like I said, all the records are there. You log in, you do public query, and you log in and you can, look up DuPont, Chemours, Optima, and look at all their different files, everything that we have.
Thank you for trying to answer.
I'll get him in the back and then I can get you. Yes,
Got a
sir.
few questions that I have wrote down here, so bear with me. Have the events of the December the 8th, 2020 been resolved with Optima? Has those events been resolved and settled as far as that event's concerned?
I believe the U.S. Chemical Safety Board was investigating that, and they just released a final report back in early July, I believe it was. They had some findings and recommendations. I'd be happy to direct you to that report if you need. As far as, so that's on their end. On our end, I mean, we did, Mike, you might want to step in on this one as far as the reach the agreement with Optima Belle as far as that process and everything goes with that.
My name is Mike Agner. I'm the air toxics coordinator for DEP. Our hazardous waste section within DEP went to circuit court and had a settlement with the company. They are no longer allowed to do that process, and they paid a fine. And they were issued a notice of violation because of the exclusion.
Okay.
So they won't be doing that process.
And you mentioned the Chemical Safety Board. Have we got feedback from them or considered their findings at all when looking at allowing the change or this change or permit?
Sure. So
Have we
the,
taken that into consideration?
right. So we, obviously, we're aware of that report, and based on what the CSB found, it was essentially a lack of communication between Optima and Clearon, the company they were making the product for, and a lack of following, safety protocols. And again, that's what the CSB found. They made recommendations based on that to a number of different entities, none of which had any jurisdiction. We didn't have any jurisdiction over any of those issues that were found or any of the entities that were, recommended. No recommendations were made to the DEP in our change. So factoring all that in, we can't take that report and use that to guide our permitting decision or enforcement action. That's a separate entity with a separate report. It's not something that we can factor into our permitting process.
And has the DEP talked to the landlord of the location there in Bell to get their concerns or their thoughts on Optima making this change?
Is that even required?
No,
I didn't
it's-
talk to any landlord.
I'm sorry?
I didn't talk to the landlord.
I don't believe it.
I'm not even sure who the landlord is. I mean, I think Chemours or DuPont is.
I'm fairly certain that Chemours, fairly certain we would have to double check for the record, but I'm fairly certain it's Chemours that owns the facility, and Optima is a lessee, however you say that word, for the facility that they're running.
But, we don't check with a landlord about it. All we would check in terms of a landlord kind of situation would be, does Optima have a lease or the right to have that property? Therefore, because our permits are site specific. Clearly they're there, as far, Chemours or DuPont hasn't broken the lease and told them to shut down or kicked them out. I mean, but we don't, that's not something that we would do in terms of talking, that would be the landlord situation. That would be between them and Optima in terms of whether they want to keep their relationship going. We look at air quality issues, and that's all we're looking at in terms of issuing a permit.
So if Chemours had a concern about the change, I guess you would say, DEP wouldn't consider that concern.
Oh, sure we would. just like you all are here tonight and you're bringing us your questions and your concerns, if Camora's had concerns, we inspect them, we look at them, we
Sure.
permit them, they know our number. So I don't think they would be shy about telling us that they
Sure.
had a concern.
But if we don't talk to them, we may not be able to hear those concerns is my question.
Well, but again, just like you're talking to us now and you've
Sure.
approached us, I would consider, them to be the same as if you've got a question. I can't speculate who might have a question, who might have a concern. I
Sure.
really need you to come to me so that I understand and I can try to answer
I
your question.
understand. I understand. And then I guess my last question is, as a resident of Belle, is there a reason this public meeting wouldn't be held in the community that's mostly affected by any changes that might be made? As you know, Kanawha County in general, especially Eastern Kanawha County, has a lot of elderly who might not be able to get here. Public access ART is heavily used in that area. Is there a reason a public notice or public meeting wouldn't be held in the area that actually the changes want to affect most?
Our rule requires us to have a meeting if requested as near as practicable. And, the DEP has a location, plenty of parking where you all can come. And so location where we have the TVs where we can, make everybody comfortable. I would point out that we do have an option of virtual meetings if requested, but the person who requested this public meeting asked for it to be in person. So that's why we're all here tonight.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering what, if you all knew what temperature these incinerators would be running at, the updated ones?
It's in the permit.
I don't have it with me on that.
Incinerators are fairly standard. I would imagine it shouldn't be less than 1,400 degrees, but sometimes
It's a range between 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit and 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the operating parameter requirement in the draft permit.
Would increasing this eliminate more of the pollutants, or is that just, you said different standards, so is that?
Increasing it may result in higher emissions of a different chemical. I mean, I know at certain temperatures, your NOx levels go up. So that's why there's a range specified.
And sometimes you need an additional fuel to get that higher temperature. So if you want to burn at a higher temperature, you might then need natural gas to help burn, and then you end up with more pollutants. So there's fine tuning in there.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Do you have a question?
Are you going to read the questions that were submitted online?
We weren't planning to, but if, Nicole, did you have those?
No, that's okay. I mean, I can just ask.
Yeah, you go ahead with your question.
I'm on a different rabbit hole now. So, it seems to me like a lot of questions aren't really being answered, and that's because you guys are here to answer questions about this permit solely. And it seems to me, after just a little bit of research, that people have entities or whatever it is really kind of haphazardly taken our health into consideration. I read online about something called sacrifice zones, and there are 3 of those in the Kanawha Valley. The John Amos Power Plant, some other ones, Union Carbide. And right now, Kenmore's is not on that list. I don't know if that's because they're not operational right now, or I'm sorry, Optima. Are they completely non-operational since the explosion, that company? So they were completely non-operational according to the plant manager in the fact discussion last week. According to the plant manager, I was told they were not operating until May of 21, when they started one process back. And then in September of 22, they started a second infrequent batch process. Everything that they do is a batch, so they run everything through as a batch. So they started a second process in September of 22. Okay. So just with this little bit of knowledge of that we are living around several areas where our health is impacted. If it is not the Division of Air Quality, whose fault is it to kind of like hold these companies accountable so we can like raise our children in a safe environment?
So I'll take that one.
Sure.
We get asked, about health impacts and these kind of things pretty frequently. And as you mentioned, and as we've mentioned, we have to view this in a very narrow scope. What John presented on earlier touched on a little bit that the Clean Air Act was designed, the framework that was designed around the Clean Air Act was meant to be protective of human health and the environment. So it takes, all these health analyses and everything into consideration when it was being crafted and set regulations and standards that if followed would be protective of, human health and the environment. From that, right, we established state rules and regulations that we have to follow in permitting and enforcement to make sure that those standards and those regulations are all being met. We have to follow that framework that's been established, and to change that would have to require a change to the state legislature. So if you have concerns about the air quality framework that we have to operate within, the best place that you can go is call your local state representative within the legislature, talk to them about your concerns about what changes you want to see, and have them make those changes in state code. That's the best pathway to that. We can't take the authority on ourselves and make those changes. We have to operate within the framework that's been established.
So, and this might be out of your area, are you saying that the air quality level is within the reasonable limits set by that code?
Yes. So we mentioned the national ambient air quality standards that were established by the EPA. We're currently, the whole state of West Virginia is in attainment with all those standards. We're the first state in EPA's Region 3, which is the Mid-Atlantic region, to ever reach that designation. And we're just the 16th state in the country to receive that designation since 1970, since the creation of the Clean Air Act. So we are in attainment with all the national ambient air quality standards that are established by the Clean Air Act.
Why does this interactive map tell me that if I live in the vicinity of these power plants or chemical plants, whatever they are, that I have there's an increased risk to my health, depending on how close I live. And it says, your increased cancer risk is 16 times the EPA's acceptable risk. So are we really within that code, or is that code outdated?
I mean, as far as the map that you're referring to, I'm not specific on what EPA's parameters are for that, what tools they put into that to generate that information. All we can go off right now is the fact that we are in attainment with all the standards that have been established. We have to rely on our compliance and enforcement schedules to make sure that we're these facilities are in compliance and operating in the way that they're supposed to be. That's been established by that framework. That's what we have to go on.
I've heard Joe mention and Shillingworth Capito, but I will try Baby Dog. Maybe he'll do something.
He has a little bit more power, I think,
He does have a
sometimes.
little more power.
For she.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to congratulate you on passing the back one more time. But my concern is, I've lived in Belle 72 years. This is my community. I'm worried about the air quality the whole time I've lived there. And I know you're sitting here telling me, oh, don't worry, they're not going to increase anything. But in regards to the Gazette article, and I think Mike Tony is a fine reporter and he does his research on everything. And he researched this and he has said in print twice that everything is going to increase, all of those limits. And we know they're cancer causing chemicals. We know this. So my question is, why would you even do this in a populated area? Why, like this young lady said, this is it's just not acceptable. And, and going forward, you said something about, is it under your transgression to say how many times Optima will be inspected? Is that something you can determine as part of this permit that it would seem to me like you would like keep a little better track of what they're doing? Is that something that the DEP puts in their document, that we are going to inspect you more than every 2 years? Is that,
So,
what's the schedule from now on? Do we just wonder again?
no, I believe well, Angela may be able to answer this one, but the schedule is set in the regulations, right? I mean, that's whether they're a major source or minor source.
No, we have a compliance monitoring strategy.
James, introduce yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm James Roberts, and I'm in the compliance enforcement section of charge. We have a schedule which we inspect whether major, synthetic, minor sources, and sources like this on a 2-year cycle. Now, there's nothing that precludes us, like they said earlier, if we get complaints or some other concern, we can inspect them more frequently. But, based on our schedule, it's every 2 years.
I just want to add one more thing to that. The only thing that concerns me is when this plant gets back up and running, and this gentleman on the front said that they wouldn't be doing that again, whatever caused the explosion. Is that what you said?
I said that the specific process,
Yes.
they have an agreement with Clear on, they're not allowed to do that.
And why are you replacing all of the equipment?
It's a different process. It's not the same process.
But is it the same chemical or is it different?
It's a small lots manufacturing facility, so they bring one chemical in, process it, they bring another one in, process it, and it's a variety of different chemicals that they bring in each time. So,
And they're all very bad chemicals, but the fact that they're going to be operating 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, that's what the article said. You can't blame us for wondering, if in fact they are increasing the amount that's being, released, while we're not concerned about it. And it just seems like everybody blames somebody else at this point. So,
Are they operating 24/7, 360?
And
As
we
far as I
still
know.
didn't get an answer about that.
Their emissions are based on that.
I mean, it's small as manufacturing. So they can operate 24/7, but how you make dispatch. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Question. I read the report he was referring to, Chemical Safety Board, was released July 6th. And they basically said that Clearon or Optima, neither one, all of their safety protocol was in effect. So I'd like to know if they've done anything to address that. I mean, is that not concerning to you? What if they mess up again, What if they're not following the right safety? What if they're not reporting the right numbers?
Sure.
Shouldn't the EPA have some kind of monitor up there if there's 3 or 4 different chemicals being released? That's a very narrow valley right there. Across from Simmons Creek, the explosion, they couldn't get out. There's no way out. When DuPont owned that, they kept a road clear to the back so people could get out. They don't do that now. So that's very concerning. I mean, it wasn't my neighbor across the street, her son couldn't get out to get her. She was 80-some years old to evacuate.
Sure.
So there's a lot of concern up there, not counting the elementary school. So could the EPA not put some kind of, shouldn't they not have a monitor up there with all those plants operating? And if we couldn't trust them before, you can see why we were worried about trusting them now, if they didn't follow the safety that they should have.
Right. So I think the safety protocols that you're talking about, that would be an issue for OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
But are you not
They-
concerned to give them another air permit if they didn't do the right thing that they were supposed to do to start with? I mean, to me, that would be concerning.
Right. Well, I mean, we understand that concern.
Right.
Again, we have to stay within the framework that's been established as far as air quality permit. It doesn't factor in, OSHA standards and things like that as far as workplace safety and those kind of issues. That's a separate entity that regulates those issues. It's
Yeah,
not
but the
something.
workplace issue, safety is going to affect the air quality.
Right. I mean, I understand, where you're coming from, but again, we have to stay within the framework that we have. And again, that's not something that we can factor into that.
But you said, could you consider it when you do a permit? Should you not?
I'm sorry.
Should you not consider that when you do a permit? Past violations or whatever, past things that they didn't do right? Should you not consider that?
It's not something that we can factor in. There's actually been a Supreme Court ruling that states that we can't withhold a permit or deny a permit based on a previous or current violation.
That's
Really?
interesting. You go to prison, that haunts you your whole life.
If things like particle matters, what they are mentioning don't correlate with this permit, how do we advocate to get new permit regarding like reduction units or something to take care of it? Like, is there a contact to, or is that going back to Optima? How do we get this?
I don't think I quite understand your question because, again, yes, they have particulate and they're, you know, and they're permitted for that in the permit, but what this permit revision tonight does not,
Yeah,
you know, is
that's
not
what I'm
increasing that. Are you trying to ask, how do we get that reduced more than
Yeah,
what
is
it's
this,
permitted
would
for?
that be a separate permit that we need to call Optima about, or how does that?
I mean,
Two
if
different
you want
issues.
the emissions to be less than what they're already permitted for, they would have to propose that to us. We permit a source to operate at its full capacity. And then the potential to emit and those emission limits are set at what they, if they operated, how they plan to operate to make as much product as they want to, what their capacity is, and then that's what it's permitted for. They would have to remove equipment or reduce that themselves. There are no regulations out there that I can now impose on them and say, hey, you're permitted for 20 tons of particulate. I think it should be 10. I want you to put on a control. That's not how it works. Whatever rules and regulations that are out there, whether it's a state rule or a federal regulation to control their hazardous air pollutants or control their processes, that's what they have to meet. And that's what they have in their permit. And that's how those emission limits have been set.
So can we go to Optima and say we want it to be less than and advocate for a permit change, or how? I mean,
You
Well,
can.
Sure.
You can. But again, like we mentioned earlier, if you're talking about changing state code, you're changing the framework, the legislature is the pathway to do that.
I understand that.
What is the hardcore, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I
I'm not a chemical person, I'm not a chemistry person, but I am a math person. And what is your hardcore number of the increase of risk this is putting our community at? What is we're at baseline here as of now, when they implement this permit or if they go forward with this permit, what is our risk? As a teacher in the community, I live a street, we felt the vibrate, my whole entire house shook in 2020 from that explosion. And then I think, I hate to say that we were fortunate enough to be there at night, but when we have kids in the school, like what is our increased risk? What's our response time? What are we looking at in that aspect? If something should happen, and if it's not a big if, since it's already happened in recent history.
There's many issues there. First of all, you have to remember for air quality purposes, what we're talking about here tonight, we regulate a source based on the Clean Air Act, which is for normal operation. We don't permit for malfunctions. We don't permit for instances like that. That's when investigations happen and, you know, with other agencies. That's not what we're doing. We're permitting based on the rules and regulations to say that if a source operates day in, day out, along with the source next door to it and the source down the street, are we protecting the health and welfare of the public for day in, day out normal operations? And what we're saying is we believe this permit meets the rules and regulations and it's safe to issue this permit in terms of normal operations and operating day in, day out.
But what
And to put it in perspective, I mean, these numbers, like when it's a total of less than 2 pounds per year of the total hazardous air pollutants, to need a permit on its own, you would have to have an increase of 2 pounds an hour or 5 tons per year just to trigger a permitting requirement for hazardous air pollutants. And we set that in West Virginia in our minor source permitting rule because 5 tons is half of the major source threshold of 10 tons to require major source permitting and maximum achievable control technology standards for hazardous air pollutants under the Clean Air Act. The VOCs, it's 800 pounds per year. If on its own, if that was all they were going to do right now, that wouldn't even need a permit because it would be 6 pounds per hour and 10 tons per year for VOCs is the permitting limit that triggers having to get a permit. So what I'm trying to say is, in perspective, this increase under this permit revision is very small.
So you're telling me that there is zero increase in risk and health? and health.
I'm not an epidemiologist. Risk is something that, when they look at 1 in a million risk, et cetera, that's an epidemiology judgment. When you look at that, and that has to be looked at on a chemical-wide speciated basis. What I'm saying is that under the Clean Air Act and our regulations, we believe these are small increases in overall.
So you're saying that you have computer monitors and then people obviously monitoring the computers for those potential risks or those hazards or what have you to flag it. You're saying that every 2 years that you come and inspect it. What is the turnaround time? Something happens, like what is our turnaround time to react, I guess?
You're talking like essentially like an emergency response plan
Yeah.
or something like that. So as far as air quality issues go, that's something that's overseen by the EPA. They would likely have to have some kind of, probably, Bell Chemical or Chemours, whoever would have to have response plans filed with EPA about, and that would, cover things like response time and shelter in place, calls and things like that. And I believe that would be something that the Kanawha County Emergency Management would also have a hand in as far as, response plans for a particular plant or facility. That's not something that we have jurisdiction over, that we have here at the DEP. So, we can help maybe facilitate getting those records from EPA and maybe foster some communications with Kanawha County Emergency Management, see if there's a dialogue there that could, answer those questions or maybe address some of the concerns that are here tonight.
And we can get maybe like a flow chart or something, because obviously, we knew about the explosion because we felt it, we heard it. That was instantaneous. So I'm going to assume that there is a process in place that says when A happens, this is B, when B happens, this is C, this is who we contact, and then a time period as to how do we get that information from point of impact to the community.
I mean, I'm not going to speak for the response plans that are already filed with EPA or what Kanawha County has on file for their emergency management protocols and things like that, but I would assume that there is some kind of plan of action for certain instances and things like that. Again, that's my assumption. That's something that Kanawha County would be better equipped to answer that question.
We aren't first responders. That's emergency services, and that's who they'll have the plans where Optima and DuPont and Bell will talk with the local emergency services, the county, your firemen, your police. They have all those plans put together about who blocks off the roads, who, like you said, who makes the announcement, who declares the shelter in place. Those are plans they all work on together. That's not something that we keep or we have input in.
But the increase in whatever the risk is of this, whatever the impact of this will be.
Excuse me, but I didn't introduce myself before, but I'm Dan at Valley. I'm in the same group as Angela and my manager, James Robertson. And I perhaps like just over the question you're asking is a good one, but it's sort of like if you plug in enough outlets into a circuit, you'll eventually blow the fuse or burn the house down. The permitting action is really unrelated to that. It's not really something that, because a permit is issued, in this case, we didn't even get to the threshold requiring a permit, that a increased risk for catastrophic failure is going to occur. It's a completely different event happening. The companies internally will go through a separate analysis typically for failures. I started at the Bell plant in '74. Rookie, that's what we did when we came in. We were mentored by World War II retiring engineers, and we looked at the failures in India and England, the big boat fallout accident, and the hexane expansion joint failure in England. And internally, the companies looked at what would it take, how do we design the process to reduce the risk to something that's manageable, like once in 500 years, once in 1,000 years, and then fix it. So again, the permitting action is completely unrelated to a catastrophic event. So Bev can't answer the question. It's a good one, but it's not related. There's not a risk analysis. There is not a increased risk because a company is emitting a few more chemicals. It's not even related to the process that failed before, which is not allowed on the site.
I understand what you're saying, but it's not completely irrelevant because this is the same type of equipment that caused an explosion, right? I mean, it was the incinerator in 2020.
You'll forgive me, I'm sorry.
No, it was
No.
the double cone dryers.
But that's also being replaced with this permit.
No, they're not being, they're being removed. The double cone dryers.
And in fact, John made it very specific and said that the double cone dryer will not be replaced.
Not that this matters, but if they want to replace it down the road, they can, because DEP cannot take previous actions into effect. Based on what you said, this federal law states that they can't take previous actions that's happened towards, as long as they're falling within a parameter of the guidelines that follows DEP and the Clean Air Act, correct?
Right, but there is an agreement, is my understanding, that it was our RECRA section who made an agreement with them that they would not ever do this chemical again. So it's a different agency within DEP who made that agreement.
I guess that's what's concerning to me is as long as they fall into a parameter, it doesn't really matter what their history has been. DEP can still issue permits going forward, even if they haven't followed safety actions and air quality and so on. That really doesn't make a whole lot of difference because we can't take that into consideration for anything going forward. Does that make sense? I guess that's kind of concerning to me.
Well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so
I understand.
forgive me, but I think kind of the issue there is that because somebody had a non-compliance issue, whatever, I mean, we understand this explosion was very serious, yes, but I think the idea is that just because somebody had a non-compliance, that they should be allowed to fix it, learn from their mistake, doesn't mean that they can't, then do business again.
I think the big thing here is that, with the Optima Chemical, that they have not come to the community at all. They haven't said anything to the community about what happened, what their plans are, or anything else. And I think that's why a lot of people are upset. I am a first responder. I spent the whole night in the plant that night. I'm on the Belle Fire Department and California Ambulance Authority. And, it was sad that it happened, but I realized, and I know what the OSHA report, and the fines and things like that. But that's the thing about it. They just have not come out and been open with the public to be able to say, this is what we need to do. This is the mistakes we did learn from. This is where we're headed now. And then this is what we're getting ready to do. And it just didn't happen. And that's not, I think, the right way to do it. But, I know for a fact since December 8, 2020, they're now on their third plant manager. So that to me, I mean, is kind of alarming. But,
I completely agree about the outreach. That's when a company comes to me and wants to submit a permit application and they ask questions about, well, how do we make this seamless? What kind of information do you need? One of the first things I always say is, please get your word out there. Please talk to the public so that they understand who you are and what you want to do. Because if we're West Virginians. If you come to us and talk to us and we understand who you are and what you want to do, we feel a little bit more comfortable. But if you don't, then we're a little suspicious.
Yeah, and I think that's the real thing. I mean, it's just being able to be open. But they just haven't done so.
So I can't make them. I wish I could, but I can't.
I agree. And I also serve as mayor of Belle.
I was gonna say, as mayor of Belle,
Yeah.
are you gonna take the initiative, Belle,
Oh,
and try to get some answers?
I'll
for us?
talk to them and see whether or not they will, but,
Well,
I seriously doubt that they will.
but you're the mayor. If you can't do it, who else?
But they're not in our town. They're within our area, but they are not actually within our town. And, and kind of talk to some of the county officials and, thinking maybe that we could go in as a group, whatever. Hasn't happened yet. But, it may not. And I realize what you all are doing. I see Angela a fairly good bit, living in the town and living about a block away from me. So
But, you know, that's the thing about it. I mean, it's, if the outreach was there from them, I think everybody would feel a whole lot better. You know, it's unfortunate, you know, the suits aren't over. There is still some attorneys involved and everything else. So it's, I probably know a little bit more than what I could say, but it's a sad situation.
Do you care to bring up the slide in your presentation of the equipment that is being installed? Just in the room, I know it's 2 different slides.
The new equipment as opposed to the removed.
Correct.
Go
The
back
one that's
about
big,
6 slides.
You're right there.
That's the equipment to be
That is
removed.
the remove. Do you mind to go to the next one? The
That's,
one that says, so you're talking about the double filter dryer, what have you, but you, I'm sorry. Don't- There's a, you're installing a dryer.
Yeah, they were.
How is that different from what you're removing?
On the
On the right side middle, it just says dryer. So what is, like, you've got a filter dryer. There, you have one on the previous slide, I believe, that's saying that is being removed. You have one that's being installed. So I'm assuming that's just replacing what was damaged. But what is the difference? Like, what is the difference between just a dryer? Is that just kind of a bigger umbrella for an opening, or how is that different than the?
Well, it's two things. What we're saying is the double cone dryer is a type of dryer. It's different than the new one they're going to put in. Two things. They're removing that and they're not going to put in a new double cone dryer. And they've also have an agreement that they will not be doing that process again or that chemical again. So
the terminology of dryer is exclusive to a certain piece of equipment that excludes the double dryer that caused the problem.
yes.
Well,
This would have a separate emission unit ID number in the permit.
So it could potentially be the same equipment?
No,
Am I missing-
that equipment's damaged and has been removed.
Well, I'm not saying the same exact, like we're gonna repair it and put it back. What I'm saying is can you buy?
she's saying it's a dryer and a dryer. Why is it different? Why?
What's the difference between the double cone dryer and the dryer?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The double cone dryer operates under very high pressure and temperature. And it has water that they can circulate to try to cool it. The dryer is just simply what you would imagine what you have in your house. On a same scale. It
So
doesn't-
what are the temperature differences between the two? Do you?
I don't know the specifics of it.
So the double dryer is not going in, correct?
Right. And therefore anything that would at higher pressures or higher temperatures could not be then manufactured or used because they won't have that kind of dryer.
And that language is in saying that double dryer, those temperatures that will not, like that specific language, right?
It's what that's been removed from the permit. It was listed in the permit under the equipment list, double cone dryer. That has been removed. So in a way it is specific because it's not there anymore and they're not allowed to have anything that's not in that list.
Okay, I think my concern is that the fact that dryer seems very broad. And my concern is can they have an updated model or a newer model or whatever slip in under that terminology? Does that make sense? I mean,
I'm gonna try.
so maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I think- let me
I'm just
try
kind
to-
of comparing and contrasting the two and
It wasn't necessarily the equipment that caused the problem. It was also the chemical that they were using in that equipment. And if,
The way they operate.
and the way they were operating it.
I mean,
But I think to answer your question, so when they submit their application, they list the equipment that they're going to use, which are emission sources, and they list the control equipment that they're using. And all of that equipment has a specific ID number. It has, for instance, if it's a tank, it'll say it's 120,000 gallon tank, ID number, blah, blah, blah. And so there are specific, I guess, descriptions for each piece of equipment. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question. The dryer that's in this particular permit modification is specified as a particular piece of equipment with a particular ID number and whatever other physical characteristics would identify it. Yeah, manufacturer, an installation date, there's usually like a boilerplate on a piece of equipment of when it was, who made it, when it was installed. And so those are things that are verifiable in the field. So it couldn't just be, you know what I mean? Like, I think your question was like, can they say, hey, we're gonna have a dryer?
Right.
And then
So
it's
it
really
is, so you're confirming that it is absolutely specific and nothing can be interchanged.
it should not be interchanged from the list of equipment that they submit in the application unless they would notify us.
And the application has specifications. I mean, they fill out a form for each piece of equipment that says it's this size, it's this, what it's made of, that for every different piece of equipment. So it's all in the application. And if they put in something else that's different, or, Angela goes down and visits and she's like, well, this isn't what's in your application. Well, that's a violation. Yes.
But they can still use the.
What is the chemical they're no longer making?
The chemical that caused the explosion was something that they were doing for Clearon.
Chloroisocyanurate. It was a chlorinated product that was going into the pool industry, and Optima was charged with removing water from it with the dryer, but it was a dichloroisocyanurate hydride was the chemical.
It was like a chlorinated type of bleach, correct?
Yeah, it's all like a chlorinated bleach product is what Clearline produces.
Yeah.
For the pool company.
For the pool companies, for tablets and things that use chlorine for pools.
But, looking at the idea of a dryer or any specific equipment, as Angela mentioned, that everything is very specific, has a specific set of specifications. In the case of a vessel like that, its pressure rating, its size, its materials of construction. And part of our job with inspections would be sure that that was what was installed.
I believe, ma'am, you had a question in the back. Yes.
I do. You had mentioned earlier that you had a narrow criteria for the permits. So this population or schools in the close vicinity or anything like that, is that a criteria of whether these emissions, where they land, or?
We can't factor things like zoning or the population of the area or economics or anything like that into the,
So it doesn't
permit.
matter that there's a school that's to have them out.
Who does that?
That's like zoning is typically done at the local level. So if there's a local zoning issue, that would be something that you have to go through them for, or it's not something that we have any jurisdiction over as far as where companies site their facilities.
If it's zoned for industrial or zoned for commercial or zoned for residential, that's a county or local situation. All we can do is review what somebody wants to build or operate based on the Clean Air Act rules and regulations.
Which
But
do not
nothing was triggered.
include residential information.
It doesn't
or
include any kind,
criteria.
it doesn't, there's nothing in the Clean Air Act, any state or federal rule that says you can't build X source next within 300 feet of a school. It's not in there anywhere.
How about topography of the land? Like, that's a small valley where some places are bigger, the air pollution is going to be different.
If it's a large source called a major source, that's a specific definition under the Clean Air Act, which is typically a 250 ton source. They will have to apply the best available control technology and do modeling. And the best example I can give you for modeling is like when we watch our weatherman and we're watching the hurricanes coming up and they talk about, oh, there's this model and that model. That's what we do in terms of air quality modeling of the new source. And they look at what's existing sources background and put it all into these fancy computer models to say, will that source cause or contribute to a violation of the National Ambient Air Quality Standard? But it has to be a major source. And we do complex terrain, because that's all West Virginia is with our mountains, is complex terrain, and all that's set up through those models.
Is there any plans to put any kind of air quality monitoring from like the DEP or something in that area, since there's so many different little chemical? Do y'all have them in other areas, I guess is what I'm asking?
We do have air monitoring stations. There's one downtown in Charleston and Dixie Street. There's there's monitors that on top of the library in South Charleston. There's like some up in Morgantown at the airport. There's sites all around the state, and they're based on the criteria that EPA sets forth as to where we need to put them to show that most of them are population based. So the more people that live in the area, the more that you would monitor those areas.
Is there no way to get one put in that area?
Yeah,
It seems to
absolutely.
me that there
Put in
should
that
be.
area.
We typically renew our annual monitoring network plan every year.
Yep.
Which goes open for public comment, and
It's usually in May.
What time of year is that?
Usually
In
it
May is
goes
when
in May.
so if you'd like to submit comments for that when that's open, we obviously we take that into consideration.
How do y'all put out the news on this stuff? Like, hardly anybody reads the paper anymore. I mean, how-
Apparently not, especially from
I know.
so we're required to post legal ads, which we do. The company also submits legal ads.
In the newspaper, is that all?
Well, we have, as we mentioned, we have a public notice listserv, where we put that information, and we can email it to you directly. It'll come right to your email. If you want to sign up for that, you'll get every future notice that we send out. We do that by county. So if you want to sign up for Kanawha County, you'll get everything for that. We put it on our website. We also try to include this information on our Facebook and Twitter accounts, social media. So those are our four basic.
And to be clear, that's everything. It's like, if you sign up for Kanawha County, you will get all the DEP public notices, not just air quality, for instance. It's anything DEP does. If you sign up for that, they will send you an email that says, hey, here's a public notice, and you can read and know what's going on. And if you have email or you don't have email and you don't want to do that, you can sign up and we will literally mail you the hard copy. So because you understand, there's a lot of people that like, well, I know there's email out there, but I don't like the phone. I don't want to read it on there. We can mail it to you. Thank you.
I have just a few quick questions that I think can answer. When you say that Optima says that they're never going to do that process again, is that written somewhere and record somewhere, or is that some manager guy saying we're not doing that again?
This was settled in circuit court, and there exists the documents.
Okay, court papers. That's good. That's good. I like that. Also, what percentage of permits, just like air quality permits overall, get denied?
We'd have to look into that as far as how many we've denied over.
Well,
You can't
I can tell you, I denied one in probably my 30 years. But understand that doesn't mean that we rubber stamp everything. If something isn't going to meet the rules and regulations, typically the company will withdraw that before it gets denied. So, I mean, it's typically anywhere from 10 to 15 withdrawals happen every year.
I think I did 2 in the last month.
Yeah.
So
It's, instead of being subject to a denial, if the company finds out that's not where it's heading, they will typically withdraw an application as opposed to getting there. Because if it doesn't meet the rules and regulations, you don't get your permit, and we'll tell you what the problem is. And so they'll either correct that so it will meet the rules and regulations, or they'll withdraw typically.
And we don't go to public notice to tell you that we've denied a permit, or that they've withdrawn a permit, or that we wouldn't issue a permit because they would have withdrawn it before. So there's not like a public.
Oh, I'm aware, because when I saw the article, it said DEP or whatever intends to approve this.
And that's what our rule says, that we have to go to public notice with an intent to approve a permit. So when you submit your application and we've gotten all the requirements that are laid out that say, here's the things you need to do to comply with the law, that's what's noticed. So and then the purpose of the comment period is for you to tell us if we've missed anything, if there's something in there that we did not, that we missed, and that there's something else that should be included in that permit. Now, we're only allowed to consider the things under our jurisdiction. So we can't, like, even though we're DEP, we're air, we don't put anything in that's related to water, even though that's under DEP. That would be a separate permit.
Yes,
So you're just considering like numbers and stuff. That's all you can consider. What exactly do y'all look at for the permits? Just the rules, the
We
EPA, the
look at the,
numbers?
we look at the rules that are applicable to that source. So if they're putting in a facility that, that says, you have these 5 rules apply to you, then we look at those 5 rules and see what the requirements are under those rules. And as long as they're going to be in compliance with that, our law through the legislature says the director shall issue a permit if we make the determination that they'll be in compliance with those rules. So it doesn't say that I get to ask people if they want to vote on it or anything. It says the director shall. It's not a discretionary decision.
And we should clarify too that the state of West Virginia, our state code says that we cannot be more stringent than federal law, so than the EPA. And EPA's Clean Air Act says we cannot be less stringent. So our program pretty much just directly mirrors the federal Clean Air Act program.
What is the timeline for this to be up and running and these emissions to increase? What's the timeline?
Obviously, they can't do anything until they get a permit. So we issue the permit. So we're having our meeting. We have to respond to comments, et cetera, and review that. If we issue, then they will have permission to then begin construction. And typically every application will have some kind of a plan of construction, but obviously they're waiting on us. They cannot operate until they get the permit.
So are we looking at like a year or less than a year?
I don't know exactly. I would imagine this is not, because this is a small lots manufacturing, and because what they do is they often dismantle and move things around. That's the nature of how they do it, that things aren't having to be welded and bolted in place and hooked up because it's meant to be flexible. So the true construction time, I would imagine, is very short.
Not necessarily everything would have to be constructed before they operate. They could operate a portion of the equipment. So that would occur sooner than all of the equipment being installed. So it's a difficult question for us to answer.
And they are currently operating under the existing permit they have, making existing products that are already permitted.
So a permit never sunsets? A permit's always active as long as. once it's
Our minor
issued?
source permits do not have an expiration date. We have one permit that has that. It's a temporary permit. And those are for sources, for example, when you're building roads, asphalt, maybe they need to move an asphalt plant while they're resurfacing or building a road, and that's there for 6 months to a year, and then it needs to move someplace else. So that might, that would expire. But our minor source permits do not expire. Our Title V permits for major sources, and that's another definition, is only good for 5 years, and you have to renew and resubmit a new application. But that's not the case with Optima Belle.
I don't know if this is relevant to the permit, but just as a resident of Belle, and it didn't rock my house like it did a lot of people's, because I live up more closer to town hall. But do you all have a plan in place where if there is a plant or someone and the emissions are above what they are or should be or allowed to be, do you communicate with the mayor or the emergency services? Or, because I know when that happened that night, and Dave can correct me on this or not, did the plant even know, did the fire department or the emergency services even know what chemicals were being used, or what was happening with any of that? I know we have a great fire department, but is that communication open to allow them to know, hey, this could possibly be happening because they've not met the criteria or whatever?
I think there's two different issues there. Again, we're not first responders. We don't do those emergency plans. So we don't know who notifies who when something catastrophic happens. We don't permit for that. We're permitting for everyday operation. Now, if we get a complaint because maybe somebody smells something, for instance, I mean, Freedom Industries is a fine example of that. We've all went through that a few years ago. We got odor complaints, so air quality investigated. That's how we discovered what was happening, and we all know what happened there. So yes, that shut down and investigations. Somebody went to jail for a little while. All those kinds of things. So that can happen, but for a non-compliance issue, typically it's if it's found, we issue a cease and desist, a notice of violation. We investigate, they have to tell us how they're gonna fix it. Usually there's often maybe a monetary penalty involved. And that's all under the compliance and enforcement section.
So there's no requirement to notify the community of what violations or air quality.
No, there's no public notice kind of thing, but it's all public record. And of course, and again, it's all online. If we issue, once a notice of violation is issued, if we, whatever the result is, might be a consent order where they say they're going to do this, this, and this. And again, whatever the penalties are collected, that's all public. That's all on our webpage in terms of the public database.
You have a lot on your webpage.
Oh, we do.
And it's not all up to date either.
No, like I said, anything from 2015 on is there, but we have, Belle's been here way before that. We have a lot of files going back to the
Information
70s.
is not up to date on a lot of your sections of your website.
Are there any other questions? Or we'll move on to official comments. Okay. Well, in that case, we'll go ahead and move to the official comment portion where you all can come up and give your comments on the record. I don't have let me grab the sign-in sheet real quick. Call on folks as you sign up here.
Are any of the questions or the concerns that we've expressed so far been considered as public comment?
We'll include the questions and we'll respond to the questions that we've been given, and those will be included in the public record.
All right. Again, when I call your name, if you can, please come up to the podium so we can get your comments recorded. First, we have Michelle Signer.
I'm good.
No comment? Okay, thank you. Next, we have Kathy Yates.
I guess my comments just consist of a lot of the questions that I've asked tonight is that, it's concerning to me that there's no consideration of population, there's no consideration of children at a school there. We've expressed this because it's not gotten out to the public as well. A lot of people probably feel the same way we do, but weren't able to come here. I feel like it should have taken place in our own community so people would have the opportunity to go there. As John said, there's a lot of people that don't have the avenue to make it here. So I personally am very concerned about the air quality. And some people may say, why do you live in an area that you have a concern? But I love my community. I wasn't raised there. I moved there and I love it. And as I said, we're a wide spot in the road, but it's our wide spot in the road. And I think we all strive to make it the best community we can and we raise our families there. So as you stated, that's not considered in those permitting considerations. So that really bothers me and disturbs me that that's not part or relevant to the decision that you have to make. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have David Armstrong.
He wasn't able to make it tonight.
Okay. Next, we have Jamie Pell.
I really didn't know what I was going to say up here. And I asked a lot more questions than I thought I would. I figure that my comment will be thrown out because I just want to take a moment to pray. So, Jesus, I know that you would not release poisonous gases and things that would make it harmful to your creation, the environment, the children, elderly people that live in our community. Lord, please help guide the people making decisions. It is very apparent that we live in a broken system and there's no one there to correct it. It's not the air quality's fault. You know, when we go ask Joe Manchin, it won't be his fault. It will be Governor Justice's fault. But there's got to be somewhere, someone that wants to make a change that, you know, we can protect the people and the things that we care about. So Lord, just please be with the people making these decisions, and the people that are going to face the consequences of living in these areas their entire life, because we have a lot of elderly and we have a lot of poverty in our area. So Lord, just please protect them. Amen.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else that's signed up, but I'd now like to open the floor up for anyone who maybe didn't want to give a comment, but now would like to, or didn't sign up to do so. Floor is open. All right, if no one else wishes to comment, then we will close the public meeting. I want to remind everyone that the comment period is still open until August 11th at 5 p.m. And you can contact Mr. Carney to submit your comments either by email or by written mail. And also, if you have any additional questions, feel free to contact us at the agency. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have or provide you with additional information. So again, thank everyone for coming out tonight and for taking interest. Have a good evening.